Good afternoon. Thank you for spending your lunch hour with us at City Club of Portland to talk about the state of the region. My name's Caitlin Baggett-Davis. I'm the chair of City Club's Programs Committee, and I'm so delighted to be here with all of you today. Today, our guest is Metro Council President Lynn Peterson. Metro is currently the nation's only elected regional government, which might be why so many people don't quite understand what it does. Metro was created more than 30 years ago to coordinate the communities in our region, to plan for growth, to collaborate on transportation decisions, and to protect land for farming, recreation, and wildlife. Its mission has grown over the years and now includes important work such as affordable housing, supportive housing services, tourist venues, arts and education spaces, and solid waste and recycling. In just a moment, Council President Peterson will present her State of the Region video. And after the video, at 12:30, Katrina Holland will join Council President Peterson for a conversation about what might be possible over the next decade at Metro. Katrina Holland is the Executive Director of JOIN, a homeless services agency working to support individuals' efforts to move from living on the streets into permanent housing. She's also one of the founders of Reimagine Oregon, a group of Black-led organizations, Black individual activists, and protest organizers who are working to hold elected officials accountable to enact policies that advance equity in our region. We asked Katrina to lead today's conversation because of her work in both of these roles, at the heart of the most urgent and important issues that our region must face as we explore what's possible now and for the future we all hope for. Before we begin, I need to thank a few people who made today's program possible. First, thanks to our season sponsors, Chevron, The Standard, and Wells Fargo, for making our State of the Possible series work. I'd also like to thank our supporting sponsors, Kaiser Permanente and Tonkin Torp, and our partners at Pamplin Media, X-Ray FM, and Merge Design. If you're ever unable to watch our forums, you can listen in via X-Ray stations, including 91.1 FM and 107.1 FM. I also need to give a heartfelt shout out to Bobby Regan for all of your work putting together today's program and our State of series this spring. And finally, I want to remind everyone that you can ask questions at any time during today's conversation. Just email us at questions@pdxcityclub.org or tweet at pdxcityclub using the hashtag #StateOfThePossible. Now, it is my pleasure to welcome Metro President Lynn Peterson.
On behalf of the Metro Council and the hardworking staff at your regional government, welcome to the State of the Region 2021. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that this concert hall, all of the Metro region, Oregon, and the United States are Indian land. The greater Portland area is built upon the ancestral homelands, villages, and traditional use areas of multiple indigenous tribes and bands. The lands of the confluence of the Willamette and Columbia rivers have long served as a major crossroads for the economic, social, and political interactions of tribal nations for thousands of years. We owe a special acknowledgement to the many tribes and bands who ceded these lands and who have been displaced from their homelands and resources through the settlement of the greater Portland area in the confluence of these rivers. The impacts of our settlement are ongoing and far-reaching. We are on this land because of the forced removal of its indigenous peoples by colonists, settlers, the United States government, and state of Oregon. As a government striving to embed racial equity in our work, we must acknowledge the history of violence, genocide, and theft of indigenous land that is foundational to the establishment of this nation and the state of Oregon. Since colonization, tribal nations and Native communities across America have demonstrated resilience and resistance. We recognize these strong and diverse tribal nations and communities in our region today and offer respect and gratitude for their stewardship of these lands, past, present, and future. We are embarking on a journey to require all Metro staff to build awareness and understanding of the history, tribal histories, and rights, and the lasting impacts of colonialism as we strive to recognize and consider tribal interests and priorities in our work and create equitable opportunities for all communities in the metro area. We encourage our colleagues, partners, and community members to do the same. If there were 3 words that define the state of the region and how we are riding the wave of COVID and this economic recession, they would be partnerships, flexibility, and heart. We're here at the Arlene Schnitzer Concert Hall, one of the 5 theaters operated by Metro and the Portland 5 Centers for the Arts. It is a regional asset that symbolizes all of those words. It is a partnership between the City of Portland and Metro. It is used for multiple purposes and provides the heart and center of our regional cultural realm. As you know, the Portland sign outside is as iconic as the arts and culture that have taken place within our theaters for the past 100 years. It's been almost a year since performances and shows have taken place. A year ago, on any given night, there would be nearly 2,700 people in this room, watching the symphony, listening to a lecture, attending a concert, or watching a performance. Each day, dozens of workers kept the shows going with the lighting, sound, ticket taking, selling food, or helping guests to their seats. At the theaters across the region, including this one, the pandemic has resulted in hundreds of lost jobs. People who loved what they did. Loved sharing the arts with our region, all left with the same doubt and uncertainty that so many Oregonians are facing today. When these performances can safely resume, these theaters will be ready to bring the community back together again. Last February at the 2020 State of the Region, I talked about the need for disruptive change. I was calling for something to disrupt the system because it was not working for everyone, and help turn the tide on the complex and difficult issues we were facing last February. This is not exactly what I had in mind when I called for disruption, but the challenges of 2020 made clear the problems we face, making many of those problems worse. I want to acknowledge those challenges today. I want to acknowledge how our warmer, drier weather led to an unprecedented firestorm. I want to acknowledge how centuries of acceptance of racist actions led to atrocities in Minneapolis, in Louisville, in Columbus, in Kenosha, and in our own backyard. I want to acknowledge how millions of Oregonians suddenly had their employment threatened or ended, how the federal government sent little help, and how employers, including Metro, had to make terrible choices. I want to acknowledge that we have lost over 2,100 souls to COVID in Oregon. including 900 here in the metro area. It really hits me to look at that many empty seats. It hits me that a disproportionate number of people of color were infected with COVID-19, that people of Latino ancestry make up 13% of Oregon's population and 35% of our cases, that people of Black, Indigenous, and Pacific Islander ancestry in Oregon were more than twice as likely to contract COVID-19. But I also don't want to dwell. We know pollution causes climate change. We know that our system is built to undervalue Black lives. We know that the economy is rigged for the rich and powerful and not for small business owners and the workers that keep them going. Our question for the past year and for the years to come is this: what are we going to do about it? That's an easy place for Metro to be. We are, by definition, a forward-thinking agency. The crises of 2020 were acute. They required planning for an hour ahead, not 20 years. I'm proud of the way Metro is able to adapt and partner, particularly at our visitor venues, like the Oregon Convention Center, Portland Expo Center, the Oregon Zoo, and the Portland Centers for the Arts. As I mentioned, this stage has been empty for far too long. There are other places like the Portland Expo Center and the Oregon Convention Center that were instrumental in our region's coping with the pandemic in 2020. Let's take a look at how we have been powered in our partnerships through Leading with a Heart.
When we needed an outdoor space to quickly and safely test thousands of Oregonians for COVID-19, the Portland Expo Center was a natural fit.
During this crisis, we have been honored to serve a tremendous public benefit by hosting healthcare professionals who work every day to flatten the curve by offering testing and vaccines.
Expo Center was a great partner in helping us get set up and donating a space for our operations. As the rainy season set in, we needed an indoor space, and the Oregon Convention Center's underground parking garage was a great fit. OHSU had great success with testing at the convention center, and as vaccines were deployed, the metro area health systems realized it was an ideal space and location for a mass vaccination clinic.
In these challenging times, we are excited to offer space at the Oregon Convention Center for healthcare providers to provide recovery and care during the pandemic. First with testing, and now with vaccinations. The
convention center could be used for vaccinations. OHSU moved our testing back to the Expo Center at a site now fortified to withstand the winter elements.
The Expo Center is well suited to pivot and transition our spaces quickly, from turning a film shoot into a volleyball court or setting up a drive-in and outdoor testing sites in a pandemic. We are here and committed to serve our clients, guests, and community.
Every day, in partnership with Kaiser, Legacy, and Providence, OHSU is vaccinating thousands of Oregonians at the Convention Center, and our work continues.
The team at the Portland Expo Center are proud to serve our community.
Metro and its visitor venues have been great partners in every step of the way and have helped us keep Oregon safe. Thank you, Metro.
In the midst of all this, Oregon's forests started burning. It was an unprecedented event and upended tens of thousands of Oregonian lives. Again, Metro stepped up. We welcomed the Red Cross to the Portland Expo Center to stage for the response to the horrible wildfires. And we have welcomed fire victims from Clackamas County to the Oregon Convention Center for 8 nights of safe shelter. All of this took place while we were also working on much more permanent housing in our region. In 2018, voters approved our affordable housing bond measure, designed to build housing for more than 12,000 people in our region within a decade. Today, I'm here to report great news on the progress of that measure. So far, we've committed 34% of the money approved by the voters. But that 34% is supporting the construction of 2,100 units, more than halfway to our original goal. Nearly 700 of those units already funded are for families who earn annual incomes lower than $26,000 a year. Again, we've spent a third of the resources the voters approved, but we're delivering more than half of the units we promised. We could not have had the success without the commitment of the housing authorities in the region to meet the challenge. All across the region, from Oregon City to Forest Grove, from Happy Valley to downtown Beaverton, affordable apartments are under construction. These homes will be assets in our region for generations to come. The first residents will move into properties funded with Metro resources this summer. Hundreds of people will have the stability that brings success into their own lives. At our current funding pace, we could house closer to 20,000 people, far exceeding the 12,000 person goal we set in the 2018 bond. Housing now, stability now, dignity now, and for decades to come. Now, a lot of those units will go to folks who just need a little stability, who have been left behind by the market. We all know that there are folks in our region who need a lot more than just a roof to find stability, dignity, and peace. We all see the crisis in our streets. In downtown Portland, along I-205, along Powell Boulevard, St. John's, in Beaverton, in Oregon City, people are living outside because they're unable to get the support they need to get back on their feet. Again, the federal government left us behind, and we've had to pick up where federal tax cuts left off. A year ago, voters in the Portland region passed a groundbreaking supportive housing program with an audacious goal to functionally end chronic homelessness in Greater Portland. This effort was a true partnership. This heavy lift was built on the foundation of the experience of people on the street, the providers of the service, our mayors across the region, and business throughout the area. It is a godsend to this region that we were able to get this across the finish line in the midst of a health and economic crisis last May. Metro Council was able to take a faint vision to reality. That's what we do. For much of the past year, Metro has been working with the 3 counties to design a plan that will meet the vision, to efficiently and transparently help every person experiencing chronic homelessness in Greater Portland. And while the counties will be doing a lot of the management of this effort, Metro will be providing the oversight and accountability the public demands. We heard from constituents across the region and are leaning into their request that Metro work on the metrics of accountability and success and report back.
The Supportive Housing Services measure approved by voters in May will generate game-changing investments for our community to create a system of care that fully scales to meet the needs of community members who are experiencing chronic homelessness by creating supportive housing. And supportive housing is the best known tool for addressing chronic homelessness because what it does is it both pairs long-term rent assistance or housing programs that make sure that the housing is permanently affordable for that household's low income with services both on-site in the building or in the community based programs like recovery supports, mental health care, employment programs, whatever it takes for the individual who's recovering from homelessness to both find and secure that apartment, but then also be able to stay stably in their home and recover from the traumas they've experienced while homeless.
There's a real misconception that if you get someone into housing, all the problems automatically should be solved. You know, you're not on the streets anymore. What do you have to complain about? Well, a lot of people that have been on the streets a long, long time, it's just an adjustment to sleep in a bed again. Fortunately, when I moved into this building, we have already in place a resident services coordinator, which is like our building's social worker. This person helps connect you to services and other organizations that can help you not just live and survive, but hey, how about thrive? So many people that become homeless don't start out mentally ill, but you live that existence so many years in a row. It can happen that it comes on. Everybody has a breaking point. And so coming to a place like this, you have a resident service coordinator who is not only trained to understand your issues, your trauma, your PTSD, but knows how to navigate you into other organizations and such that will help you.
Building housing isn't just about the finished goal. It's about being smart about how we use public resources. One of the ways we're doing that is in an effort to increase access to the trades and address the labor crisis in construction. I'd like to welcome Councilor Christine Lewis to talk a little bit more about this work.
Our pool of skilled labor is shrinking. Workers are aging out of the trades, and there aren't enough new workers to replace them. Part of the problem? Workplace culture. It's been well documented that women and people of color have a harder time breaking into the trades than white men. Some of that is because of bad behavior. Intimidation and harassment is particularly acute in the trades. And some of that is cultural, ensuring that businesses provide the supports that workers need to sustain a work-life balance. Metro's Construction Careers Pathway project aims to help contractors create the workplaces that can provide equity in the trades. By working with contractors on public projects to train staff on how to be more inclusive, we can expand our workforce and provide more people access to family wage, wealth-building jobs, all while doing the work the voters expect us to do anyway. Here's how what we call C2P2 works.
My name is Mike Clifford, and I'm the Director of Operations for Mortensen. I represent the general contractors on the Regional Collaborative Committee for the Construction Career Pathways Program. Throughout the industry, we know that bullying, hazing, and harassment are reasons that all workers leave construction. By taking action and improving the cultures on job sites, we can ensure that skilled workers are both physically and psychologically safe at work. By working together through the Construction Career Pathways Program, we have a unique opportunity to ensure that all workers, especially people of color and women, can enter the construction industry and stay to build a lifelong career. This will improve our industry, our communities, and people's lives.
First and foremost, the Construction Careers Pathways Project ensures that our public infrastructure projects actually benefit communities equitably. At a very basic level, it's making sure that we are putting aside investments to ensure that we have resources for diverse workers to access these jobs, to learn about them, and to actually build their careers on our projects. Additionally, we see that when you have a skilled workforce that's ready to be deployed, that our labor costs actually go down. And one of the biggest challenges we're facing in our region is we don't have enough workers to work on these projects. And I think the last piece is really a more fundamental belief that we have. When you have racial equity in the way you do business, it's actually good for our economy. It's good for the region. What we know is when we have full participation of working people from across sectors and across neighborhoods, and they have access to these great jobs and these careers, that it benefits their neighborhoods, it benefits their schools, it benefits their communities.
Making a more equitable region isn't about one destination or about one group of people. It's about all of us. It's about working toward healthy communities for everyone, about being better, more just, and stronger together. 90 years ago, when this theater opened as an old-time movie house, it and several others excluded people of color, much like most of our state. As we close out Black History Month, I want to take a moment to acknowledge how many times Black Oregonians rose to meet the challenges continually presented by racism and exclusion, and how these systems of oppression sought to dismantle Black prosperity and belonging. These systems were exposed again and again, but the calls for justice rang clearly throughout our nation last summer. We also need to recognize that these calls for justice, the events of last summer, the protests by people in this region, do not show our weakness as a region. They show our strength of resolve to disrupt the system and show the rest of the country how to lead with a heart and in partnership with our BIPOC community partners. These protests are symbols of our strength, and they will make our economy stronger. There are folks who want to take the easy way out, who compare the calls for justice to a volcanic ash cloud that will bury our city. They do not give this region enough credit for all the times it has risen from economic ashes to bloom again like a rose. We overcame the timber crash. We overcame the disinvestment in the city's urban core and suburbanization. We overcame the dot-com bust. And every time, we persevered through our own innovation and ingenuity, and the rest of the country was left playing catch-up. This will be no exception. Those who want to dismiss the region as over are people who are afraid of the conversation to come. We know the uncomfortable conversations about equity, income inequality, safety, health, and justice are coming to every single city in America. We are tackling these early, and we, again, will be the template that everyone else looks toward. As we recover together, we know that we will have to support and invest in our region's entire business community to get back on our feet, help people find jobs, and make sure that everyone can earn a living wage. And we know that this is also an opportunity to ensure that people most often left out of economic growth enjoy the positive impacts of our rebuilding as much as everyone else. That means we need to invest in childcare so that working families don't have to choose who goes back to work. We need to focus relief for vulnerable businesses, identifying ways to help them grow, whether that is rent relief, low-interest loans, or things like technical and digital marketing assistance. And we need to support vulnerable workers. Finally, this new climate of economic and social justice will make Oregon the perfect place for creating, growing, and attracting B Corporation companies that incorporate social and environmental justice into their very business models. These are the companies of the future, companies that will outperform the for-profit model by demonstrating their value to the world. Local companies like Stumptown Coffee, Tillamook Cheese, and United Fund Advisors all are paving the way in this new realm, and I want to see this region become the American B Corp hub in this decade. We will grow our economy while also meeting our needs for social responsibility and creating shared purpose within our community again. Why will companies keep growing and coming here? Not just because of our commitment to justice or equitable and durable economic growth, but also because of our commitment to our planet and our place and the beautiful environment here in Oregon. Since 1996, Metro has protected more than 17,000 acres of parks and natural areas all around our region. These are places you know and love: Graham Oaks in Wilsonville, Kenema Bluff in Oregon City, Scouters Mountain in Happy Valley, the Killen Wetlands near Banks, or Cooper Mountain in Beaverton. And they're some of our region's most popular summer destinations like Blue Lake in Fairview and Broughton Beach in Portland. This year, we are unveiling 2 new parks designed with extensive community involvement and built with the idea that all of the region's residents deserve access to the outdoors. Our parks team is doing cutting-edge work to talk to community members about the barriers they experience visiting nature and to break down those barriers so that all of our region's residents can feel comfortable in the outdoors. Now, here's Councilor Juan Carlos Gonzalez with a preview of what's to come at the Portland region's newest crown jewel.
On the west side of our region is an emerald above the hills. With sweeping views of the Tualatin Valley and miles of trails for hiking, biking, and gathering with friends, Chehalem Ridge is an inspiring place. Over the course of a 2-year engagement process, Metro worked with community members and our partner organization, Centro Cultural, on a safe and welcoming place to gather in nature. Thousands of people gathered at community events and open houses in English and in Spanish to help shape this beautiful nature park, which is set to open later this year.
When Chehalem Ridge Nature Park opens, visitors will be able to have a special experience. Perched up on a ridgetop and over 1,200 acres, there'll be a lot of opportunities to explore habitats and see great views. We've seen over 100 wildlife species up there: black-tailed deer, bobcats, American beaver, rubber boas, alligator lizards. So there's just a real range of native wildlife that can live there because of how large it is. When we started to think about a park at Chehalem Ridge, We identified sensitive areas and we worked to create a park that protected those areas while welcoming people to experience nature. We left large areas undeveloped without trails in them, so that gives the wildlife space to roam without a lot of interruption by visitors. Metro's been working on restoration at Chehalem Ridge for over 10 years. The entire site was basically a commercial tree farm. And we've been working to focus on a couple different things. One, protecting water quality by controlling erosion. And then we've also been working to take a very non-diverse industrial type forest and push it to a more natural looking forest that has more species in it and also actually is better for water quality. Protecting water quality and wildlife habitat is at the core of what Metro does, and Chehalem Ridge has given us the opportunity to take those core values and combine them with our mission to connect people to nature, support local businesses, and create a park that is welcoming for people and safe for wildlife. A lot of people care about this place and are helping us take care of it and create a really wonderful park.
When it opens, Chehalem Ridge will feature 10 miles of trails for hikers, equestrians, and off-road cyclists. With more than 1,000 acres of forest, along with accessible picnic areas and parking, this natural area has something for everyone, and we can't wait to welcome you to Chehalem Ridge.
Thank you, Councilor Gonzalez. I saw a sign earlier today when I was downtown. The sign said, "It's time for growth." You're damn right it is. Not just growth up, not just growth out, not just for more people or profits, but for growth as a region that cares about each other, that honors each other, that invests to make sure nobody is left behind. If we achieve that kind of growth, growth that pulls us all forward, we will be the national leader for recovery. This is our opportunity to build back better. Let's grab the reins and take back our own narrative. Let's write the next chapter in this region's story together. Thank you.
It's only human to pursue the elusive, while also capturing the possibilities, even something like CO2. Over the last decade, Chevron has spent over $1 billion on carbon capture projects and is investing in startup companies working to transform carbon into new forms of energy.
Oh, was I not on that entire time? Thanks, everybody. Do we have our interpreters on the screen?
We do not.
There we go. There we go. Awesome. Good to see you. Such is the world of virtual Zoom and COVID-19. Hi, everyone. My name is Katrina Holland. I'm Executive Director of Join and also one of the co-founders of Reimagine Oregon. I'm really glad to have a conversation today with President Peterson. President Peterson, thanks for putting together an awesome video, giving us sort of a rundown of the state of the region. It was a great video, lots of really informative. I have several questions here for you today, and then we'll also have some questions from the audience. I think, for a lot of folks, Metro is kind of a little bit of a mystery. Do you mind giving us a refresher of the central mission of Metro and what you guys do?
Yeah, thank you, Katrina. Thank you for being here today as well. Much appreciated. You have such a big job right now, and I appreciate you taking the time out to have this conversation. So, Metro, the easiest way to say it is that we kind of work at the level on issues where there are no boundaries, right, between cities or counties. So that region that we work in extends from Forest Grove to Troutdale, Columbia River to Wilsonville in the south. And we have 5 key areas that we work in now. We do manage the long-term growth of the everything inside the urban growth boundary. We protect 17,000 acres of land within the region through our regional park system. We manage the region's garbage and recycling system. We run most of our regional events venues in the region, the Oregon Convention Center, the Expo Center, the Portland 5 Centers for the Arts, and the Oregon Zoo. And obviously we filmed that in the Arlene Schnitzer Concert Hall, really wanting to remind people what we have in this region that we should be so excited to go back to. And now we manage the Regional Affordable Housing Construction Program and the Regional Supportive Housing Program. So 5 big areas.
5 big areas. Thank you so much. So with all of that and putting together sort of the big picture video, give us the 1-year, 5-year, 10-year picture. What does it look like building back better for reopening Metro, if and when COVID life is done, especially as it relates to achieving racial justice in our region? Can you give us 2 examples of what we should be on the lookout for?
Wow, there's so much going, and I think all of it at Metro. We have 2 lenses that we're making decisions on everything, right? One is a racial equity lens, and the other is a greenhouse gas emissions reduction lens, where we want to make sure that everything we do, we are achieving those goals. And one of those things that we've been working on with you is Reimagine Oregon, and we have really appreciated the grace and generosity which you and the other founders have shown of pushing government and holding us accountable for dismantling white supremacy. So we've committed to a specific set of actions that we were asked to look at, many of which we've already delivered on, but some of them we're still working on. But one of them is convening an agency-wide reimagining policy committee to thoroughly assess and evaluate our own approach to public safety. And folks don't think about Metro and public safety, but we do have security contracts that we have for our venues, for our facilities, and we want to make sure that we are doing that in a way that does no harm to the Black community. So we're looking and rethinking about that. Another part is that we required in the supportive housing services measure that all of the counties look at how we program and provide services to help Black, Indigenous, and people of color access housing and those services. For most of the counties in the region, it will be the first time that they're looking at any of this in that way. And so we're really proud that we can lay a stronger foundation for this measure rooted in racial equity. The last that I would just mention, we are working specifically with a program that we already had and grow it, double, maybe even triple it if we can pull it off, that we will be increasing the amount of regional illegal dumping crews that are out on the ground. And we've ended the use of incarcerated labor for those patrols, and instead be moving it into a program that's based on worker reentry model. So we're very excited about those programs, and I just want to highlight a few. There's so many.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Going back to housing a little bit, working at Join as executive director, I and our staff see some of the worst of our economy. Homelessness is beyond a crisis at this point, as we all know, and Metro has stepped up to step in. One question I have is, recognizing that homelessness is often an externality of the injustices we create in our economy, what opportunities do you see for Metro to continue pushing things forward, perhaps making use of their land use regulatory authority and partnerships to influence the real estate industry and help reduce the number of people falling into homelessness?
Yeah, I think there's two things I'd want to really highlight here. One is that we need more living wage jobs in this region. And so we really need to push forward on that. That's why we're looking at what we pay in Metro, what we require of our procurement in order to actually be able to construct a project, our C2P2 program, right? So there's a lot of work going into making sure that we're growing living wage jobs in this region so that you can actually afford to live here and have a good life, no matter who you are. I think the second part of it is our work, like you say, on the land use level. And what is creating a lot of optimism in me is that the conversation that might have started 20 years ago is starting to come to fruition, where we have jurisdictions within the region now who are looking at things differently. For instance, Lake Oswego is actually working with Habitat for Humanity to look at how they can get some affordable housing into the city for the first time. And that's really a great step forward. But also there are jurisdictions throughout the region that are waiving their system development charges for development for affordable housing or low income housing. I'd say along those fronts too, the state legislature certainly has provided a bit of momentum here in terms of being able to allow for accessory dwelling units, which I live in right here, that we were able to do so that we could have a multi-generational family situation and duplexes as well as fourplexes. So now we're able to provide a range of housing types and working with our jurisdictions to really push them and see the results on the ground as fast as we can.
Thanks for that. So sticking to, well, sort of sticking to housing just for a few more moments, voters have definitely asked Metro to step in and participate in housing as part of their mission and vision. And originally, some folks would argue that this wasn't the intended purpose of Metro, and to some caused a little bit of friction. But I'm curious of two questions. The first is, in what ways do you see this shift supporting our intentions of building our region back better? And secondly, how does your adaptation sort of shape the way you think Metro will respond to voter and constituent appetite in the future?
Wow. Okay. There's a lot in that question. I think, if we could just go back to the second question first. Obviously, we had a lot of work to do in our region around affordability and livability that had been put off for quite some time. And so there was a request by the region that we look at, again, getting to those issues that have no boundaries, making sure that we were working on affordability of the region and our ability to grow it economically so that we can have those living wage jobs. So we looked and passed the affordable housing bond measure with the support of the voters. And thank you to the voters on all of these measures. We were able to do that, which is part of our regional investment strategy. We were able to pass a green space bond measure that we were highlighting there, and is now we'll be able to carry that into the future to make sure that we are providing access to everybody, not just at the edge where we have been very much working to acquire property that would allow for clean air and clean water for the region for a long time. But now we're looking at also how do we do that inside the urban area in partnership with our jurisdictions to make sure that all parts of our community have access to parks. So we're very excited about that. The third one was the supportive housing services measure. And that obviously gets at the heart of the crisis that we're in, where we are 44,000 housing units short in this region as of several years ago before this economic crisis. And so working to fill those voids and be able to provide the rental assistance that the counties will have in their plans. But obviously the last one we had was the transportation measure. And that would have provided not only jobs, but it would have given people back over time the lost time that they didn't have at home, that they weren't able to get to the job on time because our congestion levels had risen so high. So it was a really hard defeat, but we are not idly standing by and sitting in that defeat. We listened to the voters again, and we are continually talking to folks around the region. And what we're hearing is that people really think that transportation is an important challenge that we need to move forward on. So they want that solved. So we have a plan to functionally end the chronic homelessness. We have plans and a track record of recovering our economy. And we are a tremendously wealthy metropolitan area, but there is a scarcity mindset, which is rooted in this notion that if we keep taxes low, it'll keep people who don't deserve it, or we don't want to attract others moving here. And that's got to stop. We can't keep creating boogeymen for public goods and services if we're going to have that shared prosperity that we need and deserve. I think we need to be clearer next time about the benefits that the transportation measure would have provided, and COVID was certainly a part of that, but not all of it. We need to make a direct connection to how the measure was going to make people's lives better every day. And as I think about the next round of talking about these investments, I think about a simpler message. Can we commit to having the lowest carbon emissions in the country? Can we commit to a more equitable transportation system and set a goal to reduce people's commute times to, say, 45 minutes or less, no matter how you get around? So we're going to be looking into all of those conversations and continue this regional investment strategy forward.
Awesome, thanks. If we can stick a little bit on transportation, that is one of the things that was sort of left out of your speech. I think you gave us a quick preview of what we have to look forward to. Is there anything else that folks should be on the lookout for in these next several years related to transportation for Metro?
You know, we're going to have a conversation, a serious conversation about how to pay for all of it. And that's an important conversation to have. And so I think the more folks that we can get to the table to participate in what are our options and how do they get the results that we all want, both on racial equity as well as climate change, we're going to need to figure out how all of these pieces play in getting to those results. And, you know, really thinking about how, as I stated in the speech, how do we grow our economy and how do we grow businesses that are looking inward at how they can help Oregon be a better Oregon, and really think about that social contract.
Right. Well, thank you. Those are all the questions I had for you. I had a few more, but I cut them down because we have quite a few questions from the audience. So I'd love to move into some of those questions if it's all right with you.
Thanks.
So the Oregonian was very critical of the progress being made in the planning for the expenditure of the multi-million-dollar tax measure passed last year, saying that there were few specifics as to how and what would be delivered for the tax dollars spent. How do you respond to that criticism?
Well, first of all, journalism is an important role as a watch on government. And so while I may disagree with some of the specifics of the Oregonian editorial, I think their approach is correct. Metro actually welcomes the sharp oversight of the supportive housing services. So first, I want to remind folks of what Metro's process was after the voters approved the measure last May. Our primary goal was setting up a tax collection system that makes sure everyone pays their fair share. Needless to say, without collecting the taxes the voters approved, we wouldn't be able to deliver the services the voters expected. So that's been the top priority. Our second priority, and this is where we differ with the Oregonian a little bit, was setting up the strategies for addressing chronic homelessness. I think the editorial would have liked us to establish metrics and measurements before coming up with the plan for addressing homelessness. We think it's more important to come up with the plans and move forward with those plans while making sure that we are prioritizing nationally tested strategies before we do the metrics. We still have several months before the services are actually coming online and working with people experiencing homelessness in our region. But that does give us the time to establish the baseline metrics and figure out how we will measure whether the counties, the nonprofits, the service providers are succeeding or having troubles implementing the commitment to the voters so that we can make sure that we can change course if we need to, right? So the Metro Council still hasn't authorized any of the county's work plans. And what I appreciate about the Oregonian editorial is that it is a reminder to the counties that performance metrics, very specific performance metrics, are going to be a key part of their work and a key factor that the Metro Council will take into account as we consider the work plans. So, we're playing a little bit of catch up, but Multnomah County's decision not to do a point in time count this year because of COVID really kind of hurt the ability to start with an accurate baseline. But I think by July 1st, when these services are funded, approved, and hitting the streets, we'll have a program in place to measure success.
Awesome, thank you. Sticking on the topic of housing, we had a pretty hefty question here. I'll go ahead and forewarn you. How might Metro lead the way toward a program that would offer security, legacy, and equity for all in their homes and move us away from a housing system that focuses on real estate appreciation for a few rather than secure housing for all?
I think it's a really important and great question, and Metro has partnered with Albina Vision Trust for the area around Rose Quarter and their vision around the ability to create generational wealth within the Black community of Portland. And we're learning a lot through that partnership and how to structure, as we move forward, development in that area that will benefit both Black-owned business and the ability for the Black community to be able to be part of the construction and the development of that land, as well as the ownership for the long run. And do we have all the answers yet? No, but we're working in partnership with them, and we've provided grants to help with community engagement. And 2 out of those measures that we just mentioned, the Metro Council passed a resolution that directs money directly into the development of that plan. The 3rd measure, we actually had transportation. We had $65 million set aside for the surface streets for the Albina Vision. So I'm disappointed that didn't pass.
Yeah, that was a huge hit to a lot of folks. To a lot of us, there's future opportunity, right?
That's right.
Never say never. Moving on to parks and nature, we have a pretty interesting question here. Will Metro's Parks and Nature program continue to acquire significant natural areas both inside and outside the urban growth boundary? It has been said that a lot of money will go toward things other than acquisition, which is what the voters passed the bond measure to do, add natural areas to Metro and local park provider systems.
Well, as all of our bond measures are, it's a local and regional partnership that gets things done, right? So it's a great question. Yes, this is the direct answer is yes, a significant portion of the 2019 Parks and Nature. I'm sorry. Suddenly, I'm tired. No, we're really thinking about how to protect and restore the land. The 2019 bond was the 3rd time we've earned the trust of the voters. So thanks to the voters again for a renewal of the Parks and Nature bond. Our team is working hard to protect the clean water and restore fish and wildlife habitat inside and outside the urban growth boundary, and that has not stopped. This program is important to a wide range of partners, from tribal governments, stakeholders, and community members. We're in the beginning stages of engagement to refine the 24 target areas that we had in the bond. In the meantime, our conservation work continues, including acquisitions that meet the goals outlined in the previous bond measure from 2006, which you saw with Chehalem Ridge. The new bond measure includes new things, such as the capital construction and remodel of Blue Lake Park, for instance, which has been a stalwart in our portfolio and a very heavily used park. And we wanted to make sure that we could keep that going and provide all of the services that are needed out there. A lot of for instance, the restrooms were falling apart. So we need to be able to restore that so that when people feel like they can get out there and be part of large groups again, or just walk through natural spaces right now, that those restrooms are actually open to the public. The program also has $132 million for conservation projects being led by cities and counties, park districts, or community groups. And so they will be also looking at conservation as well as educational types of capital programs. Lastly, I just want to say that this bond measure centers racial equity, community engagement, and climate resiliency in a way that the previous voter investments didn't. That means that we took the time to engage the tribes, culturally specific organizations, and others who had not benefited equitably from past investments, so that they could shape the decisions and help us ensure our work goes towards building a regional park system and nature system that is safe and welcoming for everybody. So that's the majority of how the money will be spent.
Awesome, thank you. This is a very direct question here. Can you share the long-term use of the Expo Center? Will it continue to be an event center for RV shows, outdoor shows, antique, car and swap meet shows, home improvement shows?
Yeah, so the Expo Center came to us when we were created. It has had a lot of uses in our region's history. And even though we haven't had shows there this year, it was obviously, as we pointed out, still really an important facility. It hosted events ranging from the testing for COVID to the use as a studio for filming a major TV competition show that airs in April that I can't say the name of yet. In a few weeks, it's slated to host the Sportsman's Show with new COVID safe procedures in place. And we are hopeful that COVID-19 pandemic will have subsided enough that we can host Cirque du Soleil and other events this year. But parts of the history of Expo Center are painful history. Last week was the anniversary of President Franklin Roosevelt ordering the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. And for many people of Japanese descent in Oregon, the stockyards that became part of the Expo Center, halls A and B, were the last place they went before being taken to camps in the cold inland West. The Expo Center but it's really struggled financially in this last decade, and we have a development study underway, which is probably why somebody asked the question, to look at options for the Expo Center in the future. It is zoned employment land. It's next to a freeway. It's next to the port and near the airport. So it's good for us to check in to see if this current use is the highest and best use for the public and the people of this region as a public asset. So what I'd like to see in this process is to be able to look at a variety of proposals of how people would like to see Expo used, and work with Merck and the Metro Council to get a fuller look at what people envision for this 35 acres of land and what it could do for the region in totality. That vision might include the kinds of shows that already take place there, or it might be something completely different. And I think we just want to leave it open for now to invite innovation and ingenuity around this space.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's see. I'm looking here at the questions and trying to figure out where we're gonna go next. Let's talk a little bit about maps and GIS. So there's a specific question from an advocate. How does an advocate for disabled and elderly get a regional discussion started with timely responses from multiple government entities? Isn't that a real question, to develop maps, GIS reports, language to describe and address issues of both facility accessibility and regional mobility of those who are disabled.
Yeah, we're actually we have so many different layers of information within the region that we should be able to really think about how we use the already existing data that we have and then find out what data we're going to need for the future. Our regional transportation plan is probably a great forum to start looking at how we can have a conversation that leads into changes in the next development of the regional transportation plan. But we already have a sidewalk database, so we know where there are no sidewalks and where there are sidewalks. And so we can really start there and think about where are front doors, where are, right, how do people actually access these facilities from transit centers, from the sidewalks and other modes of transportation that they may need to use, especially in constrained Main Street or downtown areas where there are, probably issues around how does even a Lyft driver have the space to be able to let somebody off safely. So I think we could definitely think about how we start that conversation and what data we're going to need for the next regional transportation plan.
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of this vision that you have for Building Back Better. One of the things that I have constantly heard over and over and over again, and I fully agree with, is that we have a responsibility with this opportunity that with this unfortunate opportunity that COVID gave us to really relook at the way we have conversations, what the outcomes are, and what we envision to be the future. Because not everything, but quite a few things have been just completely decimated and are back down to their most raw and truest forms. And so I'm looking forward to that conversation.
Yeah, and in fact, just to point out, we started this conversation with the regional transportation package that was on the ballot, where we re-looked at how entirety of corridors were accessible or not accessible, and the types of projects that were proposed in the package on 82nd, on 122nd, on TV Highway, on McLaughlin were people-oriented. So how do people need to access our transport system, and how do people need to access those land uses along there? So it was about safe crossings. It was about more crossings, right? It really was people-centered. And so that was definitely a focus of the projects that were coming forward from the community in each of those corridors.
Yeah. So another question, sort of going back to this bigger picture vision. This is a very deep and lofty question, but I'm appreciative that it's here. Society has, but does not enjoy its immense surplus, that surplus being the annual rental value of land, locations, natural resources, and government-granted privileges such as utility franchises, etc. Some places tap that a little bit, a la the Alaska oil dividend, but since such socially generated surpluses arguably are common wealth, how can Metro help us recover it and share it via residential dividends?
Wow, that's a big question.
Right?
I guess I would just say, first of all, we are not an extraction-based agency, so there's no revenue coming off natural resource extraction, and I don't think that's where Metro should, be dependent on that sort of revenue. But the model of regional governments is about shared prosperity at its very core, right? To make sure that there is a basic level of expectation of what should be provided on the public side and private side in order to make sure everybody has accessibility to a job, education, to healthcare, right? So we are already working on a shared prosperity model, but there's a lot of work to make sure that that is actually shared. And that's really where we have been focusing this regional investment strategy.
Awesome. Keeping on the theme of sort of bigger picture things, can you tell us about Metro's role in climate change and carbon reduction, which we know has had a disproportionately negative impact on BIPOC communities. What do we have to look forward to in the next couple of years that folks should be focusing on?
Well, the first thing folks should know is that we have our Climate Smart Strategies plan that it has all of the ways in which we can meet our greenhouse gas emission goals by 2035. And there are some things that get us small increments towards the cumulative reduction of impact, both on health impacts as well as climate change impacts that are affecting us all. But there's some big ones out there, right? So on the market side and a private-public partnership, how do we electrify the fleets within the region, whether that's a public fleet or a private fleet? We had worked to make sure that the regional transportation package that we put out for the bond measure had enough money to accelerate TriMet and SMART in Wilsonville, their purchase of no carbon emission vehicles, whether that be electric or other. So we were trying to accelerate that from the, I think, 30 years that TriMet felt that they could get that done to maybe 15. So, how do we accelerate these things? That's really what government can help do, is accelerate on that side. The other question that's always out there is how do we work with the state and the federal government, especially now with the Biden administration, to get more infrastructure for charging stations so that people feel confident about switching from gas or diesel to electric. On the bigger side of things, if we really, really, really want to bring down greenhouse gas emissions in this region and do it as quickly as possible, we actually need to look at things like vehicle miles traveled charges and congestion pricing. We need to work on demand management, because a lot of the reasons we have these negative impacts to BIPOC community members is because they are living very close to our interstate system. And delay on those roadways causes emissions to go sky high and creates asthma and other negative impacts on health. It's well documented, and we need to be able to bring those greenhouse gas emissions down. Does that mean we add more lanes to reduce delay so that we don't have those emissions problems? No, it means that we manage the demand so that we don't have those emissions problems. So basically, we need to think about transportation in a completely different way, because it is 40% of our greenhouse gas emissions in the state.
Right. Absolutely. Which sort of, I have to ask this question. So we're going to be investing these hundreds of millions of dollars in affordable housing development. One of the biggest sort of points that you often hear, and it's kind of a dichotomy when you hear folks talk about it, is we need to make sure that we are placing affordable housing on affordable land, which often means downstream of really unsafe areas, living in dangerous areas, places that don't have sufficient infrastructure, or places that have a food desert, utility services desert, all those sorts of things. How is Metro going to hold developers accountable to make sure that we don't just basically place poor people where we can't see them and they don't get anything?
Right. Well, we have a lot of experience in this exact issue. And one of them, right, is our transit-oriented development program that uses those exact criteria to decide where we invest and where we don't invest. So we've already been working in the space for a very long time. And because it's such a widespread issue, right, we need to focus both on the long term and the short term. And the short term is really about our criteria that we use to put public investment into, and that transit-oriented development program is one of them. The other is the affordable housing bond measure, also has criteria that point specifically to what you just laid out in terms of making sure that we have folks in community where they can get services and where they can get access to transport that is affordable. The long-term impacts are how zoning plays out in our region, right? And so both to the legislative work that was done to increase the number of homes in existing communities so that we can get folks back in, which will take time to build out as individuals make decisions about their own property over time. It's also about making sure that the zoning is there so that we can make sure that folks, when that land develops, they can develop it in a way that brings more folks to that site and it is less expensive per unit. So there's a lot of work going on in both those, and we do have the experience to make sure, and we do have the criteria in place.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest concerns that a lot of us face in the social service industry when we're trying to move someone out of homelessness and into permanent housing opportunity. It's this studio apartment over here on 172nd and such and such, where you don't necessarily have your grocery, you don't have your bus service, or you may have one bus service, and you got to travel 2 hours to get to work because you have to hit 3 or 4 different bus lines, and that's not the life that we want folks to live in this region.
No,
and so I'm oh, go ahead.
And kudos to the counties, because they have been really, all 3 counties have been working on undoing what happened in the past, which is that large amounts of housing were put as far out, right, as they could possibly put that housing that was affordable or for low-income families. 1, because of NIMBYism. 2, because the land was cheaper. And as former chair of Clackamas County, that was one of the things we were working very hard on, is that in the 1950s, 60s, right, you had housing that was built way out at the edge of Oregon City. And there wasn't even a bus that went by. So we had to figure out, I mean, it took a decade to get a sidewalk built so that at least you could walk down to the corner market, which is all they had, was a corner market, just a 7-Eleven type of place, right? Just to get that sidewalk in, let alone get the shuttle down to the Oregon City Transit Center so that there was access. So it is very near and dear to the heart, I believe, of all 3 counties who implement these programs to change everything about how we locate and fund the sites.
One final question sort of along this line, but I think could be applied to all of the different areas that Metro sort of has under its purview, is how do we strengthen and I should say work better with some of our partners who are in neighboring cities within the Metro area that may have different viewpoints, that may have different priorities for what they'd like to see moving forward. What is Metro's role in making that happen?
First of all, it's collaboration and partnerships, right? That's the only way anything can get done. But for me, having been a city councilor outside of the city of Portland, having been a county commissioner outside Multnomah County, it's recognizing where people are at and then working on establishing a regional baseline that we should be making sure that folks are well off to that baseline no matter where you live, but each jurisdiction is going to have their own path and their own journey to getting to that point. And how do we provide them the tools and provide them to have really hard conversations with their own community about how to get, and it's really important to recognize the success that they have had from where they came from in each instance, and keep just, popping champagne bottles when good things are happening and recognizing things. But it's also holding folks accountable, right, to the long-term vision. And Metro has found a really great way to be able to do that. We say up front, we think there's a problem, and we're going to hold you accountable, but we're going to work with you to find a pathway to solve if there's any issue.
Awesome. Great things laid out and talked about today. I really appreciate your time joining us. I know you also have an extremely busy schedule, so thank you for joining me in a conversation today. And thank you to City Club of Portland for hosting us. That is all the time that we have for today, and I hope that everybody has a really great afternoon. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Katrina. Thank you for everything. And I am very optimistic about this region with leadership like yours.
Thanks. Means a lot. We'll get it done. See you later, everybody.